Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, yesterday we left Narada Muni with Nalakuvera Manigriva. And we were describing the pastime, and what happened was when Krishna saw these two trees, he remembered the story. So in Krishna's mind, he was thinking the story, and that story is being described. And one thing we didn't discuss yesterday was they were playing with these ladies in the Ganga. Did you know that?
Ganga?
Yeah. Mandakini Ganga, yeah, on the heavenly planets they were playing with them. But there's some benefit in bathing in the Ganga, but not necessarily when you, as we say in America, do hoochie coochie in the Ganga. You understand hoochie coochie? You don't have to understand it. You can kind of feel what it sounds like. I want to read something that Prabhupada has written about this. It is not that everyone becomes purified by entering the Ganges. Everything spiritual and material depends on one's mental condition. In the way that the effects of chanting Hare Krishna vary with the purity with which one chants, so it is with the effects of bathing in the Ganges. Certainly, there is a basic and minimal purification, whatever one's state of mind, but over and above that, the purification varies with the faith and devotion of the pilgrim. The greater the faith and devotion, the greater the purification. So generally, although this may be true to some degree materially in some circumstances, but generally, your belief in something doesn't have an effect on you. So here it's saying that as your faith increases, your experience increases. So, someone may bathe in the Ganga or chant the holy name and not really feel much. And someone who has more faith will feel more. So faith is a real substance, and it has a huge effect on experience. And this is such a nice point, because everything we do in Krishna consciousness, the experience will vary according to the faith and application. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, and it works circularly. So if you lack faith, you lack experience. And when you lack experience, you lack faith. When you have faith, you gain experience. When you gain experience, you have faith. So you know that it creates a problem for those who don't have faith, because you need faith to get faith. And when you lack faith, it reinforces a lack of experience. Well, I chanted and nothing happened. I bathed in the Ganga, nothing happened. I went to Mayapur, nothing happened. The lack of faith, lack of experience. So that's why it said, Ado Shraddha, faith is essential. And it's good to understand that, especially for people who don't have a lot of faith, that you can't access what you want to access. To get your faith requires faith to access. So at least theoretical faith. That's why in the 10 offenses you have these two offenses. One, you think the chanting of Hare Krishna, the glories are imaginary. Or you think it's an exaggeration. So that's a lack of faith. That just by chanting this mantra you can see Krishna. You can awaken your relationship with Krishna. Someone may think it's an exaggeration. So Bhaktisiddhanta said, and therefore you have this problem. When you commit namaparad, it actually destroys faith because you don't have experience. And so you think, what's the chanting? It doesn't do anything. And I think a lot of devotees run into this, although they have faith, but maybe not enough faith and enough application to get a taste from chanting. And they start losing faith in the power of the holy name. Sometimes they lose faith in themselves. They say, well, I can't chant. But the holy name is powerful even for you. And so we don't apply it properly. You run the risk of losing faith and then thinking that, well, it can't work on me, which would also be one of the offenses, wouldn't it? Right? It doesn't work on me, so it must be an exaggeration because it says it works, but it's not working on me. So that's the danger of a lack of application of faith. Then how does faith work? Oftentimes faith is initiated on an intellectual level. Like you understand something that may not make sense, or you hear it, but it may not make sense, and the only way it could make sense is if you experience it. And the only way you could experience it is you have faith. So sometimes you actually have to have faith or believe something that doesn't make logical sense to you. For example, we say that Krishna and his name are the same. There's no reference point for that materially. There's nothing material. So when you're trying to make logical sense out of it, you can't. Because what experience do you have? Or what can you scientifically prove to establish this idea that something and what you call it is the same thing? There's no difference. There's no experience of it. And if you try to understand it, you can't. And the more you try to understand it, the more confused you get, because it doesn't make sense, because it's not a material principle. So if you're trying to get faith in something, only if it makes sense, some things which are transcendental won't make sense. And so if your baseline is it has to make sense before I can have faith, then you'll never get the experience of it. Because the holy name being none different than Krishna, you can only experience it. You can't understand it intellectually, because it doesn't make sense intellectually. In fact, Prabhupada said that you can't understand this intellectually. So Prabhupada says it, and you chant the holy name, and what do you think? I don't have experience of Krishna, or not much, but I believe that Krishna is here. So while you're chanting, you're telling yourself, Krishna is here in his name. And you accept it. What's another example, right? You go to the temple, and you look on the altar, and you ask somebody, what is this? And they explain, this is the deity. Deity is a manifestation of Krishna in stone, in metal, in wood, in earth, in mind, in paint, now in fiberglass also, porcelain. And if you're not Indian, there's no reference point for that. Your reference point is statues are not living beings, statues don't talk. You don't serve statues. I mean, when you're a little kid, you play with dolls or toys. And when you go to a church, you pay respect to the statue as a symbol. So now, how do you understand that this is Krishna? It has to be experienced, right? Through serving the deity. But how do you get to the point of serving the deity? You have to accept on faith. Otherwise, you would feel stupid serving the deity if you didn't accept on faith that the deity was Krishna, right? So you're hearing, you're not experiencing, but you have faith in the words of Srila Prabhupada, who says this is Krishna. So therefore you act with that understanding on faith that it's true, and then you get the experience that it's true. So your initial faith comes not necessarily always intellectually, but on faith in the position of the person you're hearing from, that I trust you. So now I'm going to engage in service, understanding that that Krishna is here in this deity. I don't realize it, but I'm going to act that way. So I go into the temple, I bow down. Am I bowing down to a statue? No. I know, at least I have faith, that I'm bowing down to Krishna, right? And so what happens by bowing down? You come a little closer to understanding that's Krishna. You sing to the deity. You realize I'm singing to Krishna, Krishna's hearing it. I don't experience it, but I understand it. Maybe I experience it a little bit, but by doing it, I experience it a little more. There was a really amazing story when, I've told the story before, I think, but I don't know if you've all heard it, but in Mauritius in 1982 or 83, we installed deities of Radha and Krishna. And we installed them in a rented house. And generally you install deities in a place that you own because you're not really supposed to move the deities. So we were intending to purchase the house. It was like a 25-bedroom house, a nice property, in a nice neighborhood. And it turns out that the man was asking much more for the amount of money that we're going to pay for this property. We could buy a large property and then eventually build a temple. So that's what we did. So we bought a property, but it was just farmland. And so now we had to build a temple. And we had to get we rented a temporary house, which was not suitable for taking care of the deities. It was a temporary house in order that we could build the temple and then bring the deities there. So in the meantime, there was another temple, and they had adequate facilities for the deities. So we asked if they could take care of the deities while we built the temple. So the idea was, we'll build a place in a year or so. I'm not exactly sure the year, but I think it was 6 years before, approximately 6 years before we built facility. I actually came back and helped them get the facility together. So I was there when the deities were installed, and I came back. Maybe now they're finally going to build a temple now. We built a temporary temple there. And so after 6 years, we called up the other temple and said, now we're ready. And they said, we're not giving you the deities back. He said, why? He said, because we've been worshiping them for 6 years. And so we've become attached to them, they've become our deities. And he said, well, you have to give them back because these are our deities. He said, no, we're not giving them back. We can't live without these have been our deities. We can't live without them. So it was a unique experience. I don't think that's ever happened in ISKCON before. Maybe once it almost happened, where you're taking care of deities and you take care of them for so long that you become attached and then you have to give them back. So there was this tug of war, and we saw that the devotees had become very attached to the deities. So this is the experience you have by serving the deities, and you can't have that experience intellectually, and you have to have faith in the words of the Guru to have that experience. So in the early days, fortunately, the devotees had a lot of faith, and so they did what Prabhupada said. And so without that kind of faith, you can bathe in the Ganga, you can do so many things, and you won't have much of an experience. And as I said, when you don't have it's a paradox, but when you don't have initial faith, you don't get experience. And that lack of experience fortifies a lack of faith. It's, you can't really get around it. So you can't underestimate the importance of faith. Because you can say, well, by hearing you'll get faith, by associating you'll get faith, by chanting Hare Krishna you'll get faith. But if you don't have that initial faith and acceptance to some degree, it may not happen. And the opposite may happen. Another thing that I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this, but sometimes I've found people who have doubts, or devotees' parents who have doubts, or who are antagonistic to Krishna consciousness, it seems like Krishna always fulfills their doubts. He always like confirms their doubts. Their doubts may not be correct, but he creates a situation in which they have a bad experience because that's what they expect of Krishna consciousness, and they have a bad experience. Have you ever seen that? I've seen parents who are very antagonistic, and they'll come to the temple and they'll always meet the wrong person, the person who will just fuel their animosities, the one they meet, not the nice devotee who could pacify them. And I've seen when they've come around and changed their attitude, then they meet the nice devotee and have the nice experience. It's interesting how Krishna reciprocates. So if there's a lack of faith, oftentimes Krishna feeds that lack. There's like if you're an atheist, Krishna will support you in your atheism. So if you have a lack of faith, he'll support that. And often we say lack of faith is due to lack of piety. So there is this idea that if you engage in devotional service, faith will come. That we don't want to minimize that. So maybe you don't have faith, and I say, well, can you help us serve prasadam? I don't preach to you. I say, can you help us serve prasadam? Could you clean the temple? We're going here, can you help us? So by doing these activities, often we see the faith will awaken. There's another story. This is a funny story. I've told this story before, but I think it's significant. There was one member of our congregation, this is a Western congregation, and he wasn't really a devotee, but he liked devotees, and he liked doing service. And his profession was in advertising. So we had a restaurant, and he was in charge of doing the advertising for the restaurant. And I think eventually we printed a magazine that went in the newspaper, and he helped us do that, pay the newspaper and insert a magazine about our movement. And then he did some surveys and studying people's opinions of the Hare Krishna. It was all professional, calling people, what do you think of the Hare Krishna? And then we would analyze the data. And then for the temple programs, he would do all the advertising, the flyers. And it was all very professional, ads for the restaurant. Eat smart, $4.99, all you can eat smart, things like that. Clever advertising. And every time you'd meet him, you would say, Hari Bol, Hare Krishna. And he'd say, hello. He would never say Hare Krishna. Somehow I can't remember his name now. I don't know why. But he liked devotees, and he'd always do service. But he wouldn't chant. During the kirtan, he wouldn't chant. He would just be there. He'd dance, but he wouldn't chant. And he would never say Hare Krishna. And this went on for a couple years. And I don't know what happened, but he was engaged in some very productive work that produced a lot of good results. And he became very excited about it and very happy. And one day he left a message on the answering machine, the voicemail of the temple president. And the message was, Hari Bol. No. I said, I just wanted to say Hari Bol. That was his message. So sometimes faith develops that way just by service. But if we're too antagonistic, then we just say no. If we're too logical, sometimes we won't get it. Now you might say, but aren't we supposed to preach logically? We are. But because we also have to describe things which are transcendental, sometimes things which are transcendental aren't always entirely logical. And that's, hard for some people who don't have the piety to understand that. We've taken tour groups, and you see this on tour groups who come to India. We took a tour group, and
What is that?
Tours?
You say something else. Target groups.
What?
Target groups.
Tour. Group of people who come on tour to India. Tours? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we brought them to Mayapur, and then one day we decided to go to the Ganga, and half of them said, I'm not going to bathe in the Ganga because they heard the Ganga is impure. And, we're trying to explain. and it was really difficult. So if you're seeing things materially, it's very difficult to execute Krishna consciousness. So we're trying to see things through the eyes of our guru, just like Prabhupada would sometimes drop bombs on us and say things which didn't make sense to us. And the faithful disciples would accept that the Prabhupada said this. They try to understand what he meant. And then by having that faith, that's the requisite to understand. And sometimes he'd say something, it just didn't make sense. And just still, many controversial points, we're still trying to understand what did Prabhupada mean by this, because we know what he said is true, it just doesn't seem right to us. But we have the faith, so we try to understand. Rather than say, it can't be, we try to understand as best we can what he means. So that way we get insight. Right? Yes? Okay. So, So there's a couple lessons here to learn. One lesson is, as we know, if you get association of a devotee, that can change your life. So Nalakuvera and Manigriva got Narada Muni's association, and that definitely changed their life. More probably than anyone's life could change, because they became trees. So that was a big change. But they also got Krishna's darshan. So, yeah. It was quite a, anyway, it's quite an event, right? The other thing it shows us is that, as we were saying yesterday, Nalakuvera and Manigriva are demigods, so they're high class, but they became degraded. And so, the other thing this story teaches us is about the effects of negative environments and negative association. So this is very, very important. In the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada says something that I think is very significant. He said that a devotee is very careful to always keep himself in a position where he can be strong in Krishna consciousness, so that he can have realizations. That he never will put himself in a position where his realization of Krishna would be compromised. Because advancement depends on realization. So let's put that in another context. A devotee understands that the environment that he's in affects his consciousness. The devotee understands that realization in Krishna consciousness comes from the right spiritual environment. That we're not independent where we can just have realization, right? Here, 1, 2, 3, get a realization. You have to be in an environment which is spiritually surcharged. You have to be doing the right things. Have you ever been in a situation where you weren't having any realizations? Anyone experienced that? Like, a day or a week or a month, it was like, what's your realization, Prabhu? Only realization I have is Maya is really strong. You've been in a situation like that. So then, if you've been in a situation like that, probably environmentally you're not doing well. You're not getting good association. You're not reading, whatever it is. You're working too hard or not associating enough with devotees. So, realizations, I like to look at realizations with this example. You're in a forest, it's dark, and you don't know how you got there, but you have to get out. And you need some clue how to get out. So the forest is the material world, and the realizations are these little, like, light beams that show a path out. Oh, I just had a realization. What is a realization? It's an insight in how to get out of the forest of the material world, isn't it? And when you're not having realizations, it means you don't know how to get out, isn't it? It's like, I don't know where to go. The forest is dark. I don't know, go left or right. So realizations are like, okay, what's your next step? I got a realization. And when you get a realization, you usually act on it. I got a realization. It's really important to learn shlokas. So now I'm learning shlokas every day. I had a realization. I got up early this morning. Early morning's so good. I'm going to do that every morning. Realizations produce actions. So they're like little beams of light that push you forward. And if you don't have realization, then you're not going to do well in Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada said a devotee is very careful to keep himself in a situation where his Krishna consciousness won't be depleted and where he'll have realizations, because he knows that advancement is dependent on realization. Right? So now, the point here is that you have these beings, Nalakuvera and Manigriva, who are high class. They should be living in the mode of goodness, and now by associating with girls from the wrong side of town and this and that, they become degraded. So it's just a warning that how vulnerable we are to the influences of Maya if we get the wrong association. And to just underscore this point, when Lord Chaitanya was asked, what is the behavior of a devotee? He answered, you might think a devotee means he chants Hare Krishna. He said a devotee is one who doesn't associate with non-devotees, associates with devotees. That's the behavior of a devotee. It's very, very important. Chaitanya Charitamrita says association is the root cause of bhakti. That's where it comes from. In the stage of sadhana and in the perfect stage, it's also considered, the verse says it's essential in both stages. It's not that you give it up. No, it's essential to nourish bhakti in all stages. So, and environments which are sattvic or transcendental are extremely important because we're affected by our environments. We're very conditioned. We're very susceptible to the influences of our environment. So, a devotee, I should put myself in environments which will uplift me. That's intelligent. Because if I'm in the right environment, automatically I go up. So I just have to be smart enough to put myself in an environment that will pick me up, rather than stupid enough to think that I can fight against a negative environment and be Krishna conscious. Maybe you can, but you'll be putting all your energy fighting against negativity. And so you really are just defending yourself from the negative and not moving that far positively. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's, you can see that devotees who are serious about Krishna consciousness, they'll always seek out good association. They'll make sure they get it, because they know by getting it, they'll advance. They need it. They understand what they need. And they're very careful not to put themselves in situations which could be detrimental. No, it's okay, we're just going here. They're very, very careful. No, it's not okay. That if there's a situation in which we could be affected, then we have to be aware of that. I also think it's significant that Prabhupada said, as you know, that even on the stage of bhava, if a devotee hears Mayavadi philosophy, he could fall down. That's amazing, isn't it? That the conditioned nature is such that to hear that I am God, you're a God, we're all God, it resonates so deeply on a conditioned level that even from the stage of bhava, it could pull you out of that. It's rare, but don't make an experiment. Don't try it out. But it's an interesting thing to meditate. Stage of bhava is one stage before prema. Stage of bhava is the stage where you realize the stage you realize your relationship. You don't realize the details, but you know. This is your rasa. It's a pretty evolved stage. And you could fall from that by the influence of Mayavad philosophy. So my personal realization is, don't ever underestimate the power of our conditioning, because our conditioning has been going on for lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes. And it's like, let's say you like chocolate, but you haven't eaten chocolate in a long time. And I come up and say, I got some really good chocolate. It's from Switzerland, you know. And you're like, no, I don't eat chocolate. No, you got to check this out. There's no chocolate like this. And, you know, and I finally coax you, just take a little bite, you know, that's it. You're going to eat the whole chocolate bar, or 2 bars, or 3 bars, right? Because even though you haven't eaten it for so long, still, you love it so much, in the wrong environment, it'll be activated, right? It's like, Prabhupada was once asked, I think he was asked, how are you different what's the difference between you and everyone else? And he said, well, I could be in a room full of naked women and not be agitated, right? So, don't try this at home. Just, you know, I want to test my level of Krishna consciousness. So I called up a few prostitutes, you know, and see what happens. And just want to see how I'm doing. No. I can tell you the result of that. You don't have to try it. If you did try it, you would realize how conditioned you still are, right? So we have to be a little careful. Even on an advanced stage, a devotee is careful to always keep himself in an environment where he can grow. So those are 2 lessons we get from this story. These were elevated people, they became degraded. They're demigods, they became very degraded. I mean, they're drunk, completely drunk. That's not the behavior of demigods, but by bad association, bad environment, that's what happened. Okay? So, now, as we said yesterday, Narada Muni had contemplated what to do, and he decided that he wants to bless them with Krishna Prema, but first he has to purify them and humble them. And the way he'll humble them is to take away all their wealth and their position and become trees. So then, in order to do that, before Narada Muni cursed them and told them what he's going to do, he preached to them about the ill effects of wealth and how you ended up in this situation because of wealth. So he explained, when you become wealthy, you become proud, and as you know, when you become wealthy, it gives you more facility to break the other 3 principles, right? That's called Las Vegas. Las Vegas is the personification of gambling, meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication. I don't know if you've been to Las Vegas before, but prostitution is rampant, meat eating is rampant, obviously gambling is rampant. What did I miss? Prostitution, illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, gambling.
It's not only there, it's glorified there.
Yeah, it's in your face. That's what you do there. I mean, it's on the street. It's right in front of your face everywhere, as if it's normal. But Narada Muni was explaining that naturally when you're wealthy, you become proud. And naturally when you're wealthy, you have facility for all the other sinful activities. So he's explaining, Nalakuvera and Manigriva, this is what happened to you. You didn't know how to handle your wealth. And so he began preaching about this. So we'll just discuss a few things he said. He said, so what happens when you become proud, often when you become proud, you somehow you think you can commit sin and it's okay. Like you're privileged or something. You know, like you develop this mentality, well, I don't believe in karma, I don't believe in this and that. So he was preaching to them. He said, this is kind of where you ended up. And I was thinking about this. It's very interesting. Any sinful activity we perform, it may give us some enjoyment, right? But now, just think about all the enjoyment you got in life. Up to the age you are, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever you are. Think about all the enjoyment you got. Generally, you experience that enjoyment for a few hours or a few days after you do it, right? You go on vacation and you get back to work, you got the suntan, you've been relaxing. How was it? It was great, I feel really good, right? By Friday, it's worn out, isn't it? It's like you're back to the grind and so all that money you spent and so forth, it doesn't really last. But what lasts is the sinful reaction, isn't it? So Narada Muni is trying to explain that all this enjoyment you get in the moment you're enjoying, but a few days later, or even right after, you're just back to normal. They actually they've done experiments, I don't know if they're experiments, but they did research, and they said that psychologically, we all have a default setting on the level of happiness we experience. So even if something bad happens, we'll tend to oscillate back to that level. And if something good happens, we'll tend to deflate down to that level after a certain period of time. So what they found is, at the same time that a person gets in an accident and is handicapped for a year, a person wins the lottery, and if you investigate their level of consciousness when it happens, obviously the person in the accident is very low, the person who won the lottery is very high, but a year later they're back to their normal level, or 6 months later. They default back to their normal setting, no matter what happens. Isn't that interesting? So that means all the enjoyment you get, you have a default setting of consciousness, and that's where you always end up, no matter what you get. But the problem is you get the sinful reactions. So that's what he's telling them. Look at all this enjoyment you got. Well, what are you getting from it now? You had a good time, but what are you getting from it now? Now you've got the sinful reaction. That's what you got. And you're not experiencing any of the enjoyment. You have some photos on your phone. Hey, look what I did. But, that's about it. Those were expensive photos. I spent a few $1,000s to get those photos. Now, the next thing he said is, as we were saying yesterday, when you're wealthy, you become proud and you lose empathy. So we were giving the example of people shopping in the beautiful gold jewelry stores in India, and right outside the store, unlike the West, is a person living on the street or a beggar, and then you come out and they're asking for something. Get away, don't bother me. So Narada Muni was saying, when you become wealthy, you lose empathy and compassion. So when you become, I will make you poor. So when you become poor, then you sympathize with other people's poverty. It brings out good qualities. So he was feeling that they lost their good qualities. I'll help bring it out. I'll make you poor, and then you'll empathize with poor people. And the example is given, I believe Prabhupada gave this. If a poor person becomes rich, they'll always empathize with the poor people. They'll try to help them. Because they were there, and they had experienced the suffering, so they empathize with them. And that's why we were saying yesterday, a devotee can empathize with the suffering of people better than Krishna, because the devotee suffered. And now we know how people are suffering. Interesting. So the devotees, they really do the work for Krishna. They're really in a good position to do the work, because they can empathize. Another thing he said is that, this is very interesting. I want to talk about this. Austerity. He said a poor man does austerity. Why? You see how poor people live here in Mayapur? Do they live austerely? Do they have austere homes? They sleep on the floor or on a rickety old bed. They eat simply. They don't have money. So, Narada Muni is saying, we rob you of your wealth, you'll have to do austerity, and you become purified by austerity. Living in America, maybe it's the same in Australia, people can't do austerity. Anytime there's a little austerity on the horizon, they can't deal with it. Like, we're going to have to cut back on water, we're wasting too much water, or, there was an austerity they imposed on the Americans once, or suggested, some kind of monetary austerity to build the economy, like don't spend so much money or something. And it was really, people couldn't do it. They're not used to austerity. And this current generation, I don't know in the rest of the world, but this current generation has grown up with so much ease in their life that they're pretty useless right now. They get a job, and then they expect on their first day to just have things handed to them, and they, no, go clean this, do that. I didn't get a college education to clean this and do that. They're not ready for it. So Narada Muni was saying that if you do austerity, you become purified. And so if you're poor, you automatically do austerity. So that's good, right? So it's important to understand, because when you advance in Krishna consciousness, you start to get a taste for austerity. Well, more men get more of a taste than women. By nature, their bodies are more fragile. They don't generally like austerity as much as men like it. And husbands, don't put your wives through too much austerity because they don't like it. Some women may like it, but generally it's easier for men. But in any case, we have austerity of rising early and so forth. Even chanting japa for 2 hours is an austerity, at least for many people. But these things are necessary, and as you advance, you become attached to austerity. Like sometimes I do austerities, and my wife, she's looking at me and she's like, "What's wrong with you? How could you do that?" But for me, to not do it makes me uncomfortable. I don't feel good, because I know I can do it, and I know it's good for me. And so to just, like Prabhupada says in the Bhagavatam, to live a comfortable life and try to advance in Krishna consciousness, it doesn't always go so well together. So it's always good, what we say, to be on the edge, you understand? On the edge, you can have a comfortable life, but not so comfortable where there's no austerity. So austerity is good, it's healthy. I got my soft bed, my plush carpet, central heating, central air conditioning, heated seats in my car. I've got this $1,000 chair I sit in behind my desk. It's like, that's Western life. There's like no, you eliminate every austerity. On my phone, I can control my microwave from work. I press a button, my garage door opens. Press another button, this opens. So that's the way the world is going, isn't it? It's going like ultimate comfort everywhere. I got the ultimate shoes. A disciple of mine bought me some Nike shoes when we were in London, and I've never had shoes that comfortable. There's amazing. It's like you're floating. It's like you're walking on sand or floating on air. There's compared to a wooden pair of shoes, compared to some carbs, it's a lot different. So that's Western society. It's all about comfort, isn't it? The ultimate, my chair is so comfortable. And then we get attached to these things, right? Isn't it? Yes.
Narada Maharaj is always speaking about the 3 zones. The first is the comfort zone, then the stretch zone, and the panic zone. He said we always should be in the stretch zone.
Yeah, stretching. Yeah. Well, sometimes the stretch zone and the panic zone are similar. But the point is that at least we should understand the principle. Austerity is not only healthy, it's necessary. And it's good for us. And austerity means sometimes you don't do something that you like to do because you know it would be better if you didn't do it. Or you do something, or you avoid something you'd like to do, or you do something you don't want to do because you know it's good for you. So you do the austerity. Going on book distribution, or preaching, traveling around the world, there's so many austerities. I was traveling a lot this year, and so some people say, well, isn't it difficult? How do you do it? But I say, it's an austerity. It can be difficult, but it's an austerity in Krishna service, so there's pleasure there because you become purified, right? So whenever you become purified, you become happy. I was telling, I think, last night I was telling Aditi, and I said, are you ready to become humble? And she said, maybe tomorrow or something, not yet, or something like that. And I said...
One night I was meditating upon it, I couldn't sleep.
And I was saying that the thing to understand is that when you become humble, it brings you closer to Krishna. Because the fear is if I become humble, I'll suffer. But anything you do that brings you closer to Krishna will make you blissful, right? So if you do an austerity, it's difficult, but if it brings you closer to Krishna, it'll make you happy. So we look at the negative side, like this will make me unhappy. But if it'll bring you closer to Krishna, how could it make you unhappy? So that's why devotees like austerity. It's not like they enjoy suffering, but they enjoy the results of the sacrifice they make. So they feel good making a sacrifice. So they'll, do a fast. It's difficult, but the next day they'll feel good. I did that. I feel really purified. I'm happy. I do Govardhan Parikrama, 5, 6, 7 hours. No shoes. It's an austerity, but at the end, when you come back after doing that, you just feel amazing. So that's the nature of austerity. So if you understand that, you can be excited and inspired to do some more austerity. Right? And see it positively. So Narada Muni is saying, okay, we're going to make you poverty-stricken. This will be good austerity for you. And you become purified. You'll do austerity. You won't have a choice. You have to do it because you don't have any money. Then he went on to say, he said, when you're poor, you can't eat nicely. You can't afford it. And when you eat simply, your senses calm down. You won't eat a lot, and you're not going to eat plates of sabji, deep fried in ghee, and sweet rice, and deep fried this and that. You'll eat simply, and so your senses will be pacified. Sometimes it's very interesting, isn't it, to be entrapped in a body? Have you noticed, like sometimes your body wants something, and you're inside of it, and you can't do anything because it's saying, give me this. Even if you don't want to give it, it's just pushing, pushing, pushing. Isn't that a weird situation to be in? So sometimes we have desires, like I want something, I want to eat something, I want to see something, I want to hear something, or sexual desire. And we're trapped. It's just the body's just beeping. The senses are going beep, beep, beep to fill me. And we're sitting there. And it's not even necessarily having to do, sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't really have anything to do with our state of consciousness. It's just the body. The body's doing, feed me, I'm hungry, I have to eat, you haven't fed me, in 7 hours I'm starving. And then you eat too much, and the body, as Prabhupada said, the tongue, the belly, the genitals, and now the genitals is going, hello, hello, satisfy me. Say, why do I want to satisfy you? Hello, hello, I'm here. Because you've just fed it. And so it's just a physical reaction. It has nothing to do with your mind. You're not thinking about it. It's just a physical reaction. And it's, so you're trapped in a body, right? And so you might think, oh, I have these such strong desires. It might be that you're just sleeping too much, you're just eating too much, and your senses are aroused by that. That's all. It may not even be your mental state. Sometimes that's all it is. And if you simplify, you sleep a little less, you eat a little less, you see your senses. They calm down. If you've ever fasted, this is my experience. On a fast day, 5 o'clock is magic hour. Any day you fast, check out for 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock is happy hour. At 5 o'clock of fasting, your senses just go, boom. I don't know if any of you have noticed that, but I've noticed 5 o'clock especially is the time where they just go completely down. They have been not fed, they don't have any energy. So you're just very, very peaceful, you're very, very calm. It's not your state of mind, you just did the austerity and therefore you're peaceful. So it's an important principle to understand that sometimes the agitation, it's not coming from the mental state, it's a physical state. You've slept too much, you watched the wrong video accidentally, You know, when you're going through, you got your eyes stuck on this thing, and you made some impression now, and it's impressions taken in through our senses, our ears, our eyes, affect us physically, isn't it? Yes? You know, if you watch people being stabbed to death, this is the reaction your body's going to go, ah, right? It's going to disturb you completely. So, the poor person, he's eating simply, his senses are calm. Isn't that interesting? Prabhupada told the sannyasis, eat less and sleep less. That's your duty. Eat less, sleep less. So, the next thing he said is, when you're poor, you're humble, and therefore you'll be open to sadhus visiting your home. When you're rich, you say, I don't need you. What do I need you for? You need me to give you money. I don't need you. So that meant that sometimes wealthy people do not respect sadhus because they think sadhus are beggars or losers or parasites or whatever. So you'll be poor, and then you'll be open to receive sadhus. So, now Nalakuvera and Manigriva are sitting there thinking, something's going to happen now. Something's coming down here. Like, judgment is coming upon us. Because he's preaching all these things to them, that, this is bad, and, if you're wealthy, it's like this, if you're poor, it's like that. So, Now, when Narada Muni began speaking to them, he didn't speak while they were drunk, but while he was getting there during this beginning ordeal when he was coming and the girls had gotten dressed and they were fooling around and they weren't paying respect. The effects of the intoxication were wearing down. So when they wore down, then this was when he was preaching. So they were now, there's a really interesting thing here. It's very important. What happened was, when the effects of the intoxication wore off, then they were remorseful. They realized what they had done. And they were very remorseful, and they were conscious of what's going on. I wish I could put out a message to the universe. Don't write me when I give class. I guess I should turn the notification sounds off. That would help, right? So, Nalakuvera and Manigriva are, they've understood they made a mistake. They're listening. They're now respectful. And Narada Muni was also preaching for everybody who was there that could hear him, and also for us. And they're waiting for the universe to collapse on their head. What's he going to do? So the first thing they said is, can you pardon us? Can you just let this go? We made a mistake. Of course, you know the story. So Narada Muni said, no, you're naked, so trees are naked, and you deserve to be naked. Now, they said something, I don't know if you know they said this, they said something really interesting. They said, well, if we have to be trees, can we be trees in Vrindavan? So we can see Krishna's pastimes. That, externally, that doesn't seem to make any sense. They're these demigods who are partying all the time, and licentious and just ruining their lives. And now they're asking Narada Muni, please, let us be trees in Vrindavan. Why? Because what this shows is that if you get these samskars when you're young, if you get the right knowledge and the right training, even when you become degraded, when you come to your senses, that comes out. There was, you may know that in the first generation of our children, these are the children born in the 70s, the educational system was fraught with many problems, and a lot of the children suffered. And a lot of the parents also were not stable, and that was also a cause of suffering. And I think beginning in the 90s, there were meetings with the second generation to discuss the problems of the past, the problems of the present, how to deal with the problems they had in the past, and how to move forward. And I was told one of them said, actually, my experience at a certain part of my life in ISKCON was so bad that I was just trying to forget Krishna. You know that experience? Like you love somebody and it doesn't work out, so you just try to forget them. It's like, the experience was, it might have been good for a while, but then it turned bad. I just want to forget you. Right? So he was saying that was his experience. It got so bad, he just wanted to wipe it out of his mind. And he said, but you did such a good job that you got Krishna in me so deeply that I couldn't get him out. Even I wanted to. So I think that's significant, that, that these demigods had sufficient levels of spiritual consciousness so that now they're asking, well, can we take birth in Vrindavan from this very degraded state? They could key into that state. So that's important. That, Krishna says nothing's lost. So it's really important to impregnate Krishna consciousness within our hearts as deeply as possible. Because if we do, then no matter what happens, we'll always come back to it. And whenever we hear it, it'll make sense to us, and we'll understand that's what I should do. So that's what happened. Interesting, isn't it? So, actually, when they were still coming down from the intoxication, Narada Muni's talking to them, and they're thinking, like kids do this, teenagers. So, we didn't do anything wrong. What's the big deal? Why are you making such a big deal about it? Everybody does this. That's how they were thinking. So as Narada Muni preached to them, then they understood, no, this was wrong. But that's also a symptom of ignorance. You do something wrong, you don't realize how bad it is. Right? And I think that's the nature of society today. It's so much ignorant that people don't realize how sinful they are. Isn't it? I mean, abortion is so obviously sinful. And they don't realize it. Animal killing, so obviously sinful, they don't realize it. So, the Apsaras were up next. All right, Nalakuvera and Manigriva just got cursed, become trees. So now the Apsaras are thinking, oh my God, what's he going to do to us? As we mentioned yesterday, they ran out of the water and covered themselves, and they were remorseful. And they told Nalakuvera and Manigriva, you should do the same. So because they did that, Narada Muni spared them. Said, you're remorseful, so that's your purification. Now, let me read something. Sitting a little apart from his friends and absorbed in remembering Narada's adventures. This is Krishna is remembering this whole pastime. Everything we're discussing, it's going on in Krishna's mind. He's seeing all this, and he's remembering that this is what happened. So Krishna's there, and everything we're discussing, this is what he's thinking. And his friends are a little further away. He didn't want his friends around. He wanted to do this pastime alone. And then Krishna goes, And his friends see him nodding, and they're thinking, what's going on? And Krishna said, he's thinking about this, that now I have to deliver Nalakuvera and Manigriva because this is what Narada Muni wanted. And so he goes, so he nods his head and he says, so be it. And his friends are like, so be what? They're just watching him, like, oh, what's he up to now? What's he going to do? Is it butter? Is it like, how's he going to retaliate in Mother Yasoda in this situation? So be it. What's going on? And they just see that from a distance. So, I'm sure there are some questions on the internet, and if you have questions, you can also ask. I just want to go and read. Oh my God, it's like the whole universe is here. So it means we should pray to Krishna to have deeper faith, yes. So now we're going back to the beginning of the class. You can pray to Krishna to have faith, or you can just have it. That's also another way of doing it. So Pushkaraksha is saying, well, depending on your service, you have to meet different people. And we're talking about environment. And Prabhupada said that if you're giving people Krishna consciousness, then you'll never be adversely affected. You'll always be protected. Because I bet you have to be careful. Sometimes, the environments are toxic. But generally, Krishna will always protect you. At any time devotees were having difficulty in Sankirtan, Prabhupada always said it's not the fault of the Sankirtan, it's the fault of the devotee. He said you'll always be protected if you do it properly. So that's good to know, right? Hare Krishna, Tanya, long time no see. Lots of poor people are envious of the rich and would just like to be in their position, provided they had a similar karma. The interesting thing is, I don't know if you know anything about politics, but generally, when the oppressed get in power, they oppress also. It's the nature of power. But here, Prabhupada said, the Acharyas say that generally, if you're poor and you become wealthy, you remain sympathetic, generally, but maybe not always. Pushkar Raksha says, jetting is a physical austerity, but being hosted everywhere and having enough time to rest makes it up for it. You don't have enough time to rest. That's the problem. You don't have enough time to rest when you're jetting all over the world. At least I don't. And you're eating food from a different person's hand every day. And every few nights in a different bed. And you're eating, and they're making you eat more than you want to. It's a big austerity, believe me. I mean, I'm having a great time. I've been in Mayapur since November 9th, 3 weeks. I haven't been in one place in 3 weeks for 7 months. This is like no host, nothing. This is good. It really is. Pushkaraksha is saying obesity is prevalent amongst the poor people. Well, poor people in America are like middle class in India. So what I think we're talking about poor in India is it's like they don't have the money to get fat. I noticed, I was taking trains and flying in the 90s in India, and everyone on the train was thin and everyone on the airplane was fat. Well, almost everyone, because they had money, so they could eat well. It was amazing. I don't know if that's still true, but on the trains, people tended to be much thinner than on the airplanes because they had less money. Did anyone notice that?
Krsna gave orders on the sick
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, these are, like the sleepover trains, but I just noticed that when I took planes, it seemed people were a little overweight. And that was considered an opulence in those days also.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said the devotees are more, he understands the suffering when he becomes a devotee, so he's more merciful, if you like, than Krishna, because he knows the situation, but doesn't that deplete the all-knowing status of the Supreme Personality of Godhead?
Yeah, but he hasn't experienced it.
He hasn't experienced it.
Anyway, this is what the acharyas say, so we have to take it that way. As a devotee's position is, he can be especially kind and merciful because he's experienced the suffering. The same suffering that people he's speaking to are experiencing, he's experienced.
They would say that the Lord's knowing is incomplete.
Knowing and experiencing are different. He knows.
But his knowledge being all-dimensional, many dimensions, more than 3, 4, 5, 10 dimensions.
But he's not under the modes of nature, so he can't experience it the way we do. Because he's transcendental. He would have to be a conditioned soul. I mean, if he wanted to, of course he could. But generally speaking, he wouldn't, right? He wouldn't be existing in the modes of nature to experience exactly.
He had his friends who were called Sudama, and he understood. He was acting for his wife, Sudama, coming and seeing him, but he understood his position.
Of course, yes.
But he couldn't experience it still.
That's what they say. Is it necessary for women to be austere in Krishna consciousness? It is not our nature. We do not like rising early. Some women do. We like to have beautiful things. That's okay. We like looking good and having lots of stuff. Yeah, but don't have too much stuff. It's like, okay, what's austerity for a woman may not be an austerity for a man, so austerity is relative. But austerity, we understand austerity means don't do anything which is detrimental to your devotional service. Prabhupada wanted us all to rise early, chant 16 rounds, follow the regular principles, preach. So that austerity is for everybody, right? So you can't use that as an excuse, I'm a woman, so, I need to sleep more. Okay, go to bed earlier, whatever. But we know that it's easier for men to do austerity, but we never heard Prabhupada saying austerity is not for women. He had brahmachari ashrams. They all went on book distribution, just like the men. They lived basically the same life. So, at least do some austerity, right? Yes. And Pushkaraksha says, you're still a spirit soul, whether you like it or not. So, I think there's often a misconception about what austerity means, that some of us, when we join the temple, we do some austerities that put our health into risk. Yeah, like that. Yeah, austerity doesn't mean getting sick. We should develop proper wisdom to know what austerity is. Austerity means anything that will help you advance. Sometimes you have to... Sometimes you want to be austere and it's not healthy, so you have to do things which aren't austere, and that's your austerity. Like sometimes you're not well, you have to sleep more to get better, so you're austere. I don't like sleeping. No, your austerity is you have to sleep now. So, generally women will perform austerities that mainly a man who are more selfish and confronted, so women taking care of the home, and that's their kind of austerity. Cooking, washing dishes, and all that stuff. Yes. How can one determine if one is accumulating too much or too little wealth? We see how in due course of time this standard is very blurred. Well, if you have the karma to accumulate wealth, that's not a problem. It's just what you're going to do with it. And I think basically anything that has a detrimental effect on your bhakti, you have to consider it to be something you have to confront. So I don't know if there's a standard, too much or too little, but the idea is live simply. So your karma is to accumulate a lot of wealth, you can do a lot with it. But I think there's an addiction to accumulating wealth, and you can always get more and more and more and build up more and more. So you have to be careful. It's an interesting question. You have to be honest enough, and you can feel it, you can understand. You know, Prabhupada didn't want us to work so hard that we don't have sadhana, we don't have time to share Krishna consciousness. So that's something to consider. So Pushkaraksh is saying the poor people eat at McDonald's and then they get fat. So now we have it backwards.
Can a devotee go on a holiday and get his suntan, but take his books and read his chapter? But you know, he needs something for the health through the winter months, goes to a warmer climate. Is that completely sinful?
No. The standard that Prabhupada gave is you just evaluate everything as if it's helping your Krishna consciousness or hindering it. So you could do too much austerity, it could hinder it. Right? So is it helping or is it hindering? Yeah. If you make too much money, just call me up, I'll help you spend it. No problem. You know, I got plenty of projects, you know. It's like make all the money you want. But you know, if you're riding around in a Rolls Royce and you're giving your $10 a month to the temple, obviously there's something wrong with that. What's the point of making all that money? So, you know, you want to use it well. So, Vishwanath says, how to continue with chanting once again if someone has stopped chanting a couple of years. Just do it. Don't even think about it. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? What would you say? Someone stopped chanting.
Change association. Change association.
Change your association. Just do it. Read a lot about the holy name, what Prabhupada says, to get inspired. But above and beyond that, just pick up your beads and stop procrastinating. Just do it. And ultimately, you know, you don't want to wait to get the inspiration because it may not come, so just do it because it's the right thing. You know, I stopped chanting. Well, when are you going to start? I'm waiting for the inspiration. All right, well, how many lifetimes might you wait for it? It's better just do it. The inspiration will come if you do it. It may not come. So that's one way of dealing with it. Otherwise, you could procrastinate forever. I'm waiting for the right time. Yeah. Right time is now, isn't it? Yeah. Okay? Are we good? Are we happy? All right. So we're going to give another... I give 2 classes tomorrow. This is for Australia. So we're in Australian time, 1:45. We give a class on the nature of women. And at 2:45 we're going to talk about the stage of Asakti. And that's going to be where?
In the Grihastha Park, in the second Grihastha Park.
Oh, it'll be outside in the Grihastha Park.
The Sadhusanga is usually the Saturday.
Which is the end of the Grihastha Park. And we'll be broadcasting also. It'll be on Facebook if you can't make it, or you can tell your friends. And it'll be an interesting class. We've given a whole series on the nature of women. And I'll just tell you something I heard today. It's quite interesting, funny. This guy gets a cat, and then he puts the cat on a leash, takes the cat out to the park, throws a ball, the cat doesn't run after it. Gets a frisbee, throws it, the cat doesn't. He goes to the pet store, buys a bone, the cat just looks at it. He opens the window of the car, he puts the cat, so you can put your head out the window, the cat runs in, and he's like, what's wrong with this cat? And he said, that's how men deal with women. They deal with them like they're men, and women deal with men like they're women. So understanding the feminine nature, it's not only good for men to understand it, it's good for women to understand it, because in our culture, women have become very male. So it's sometimes a little bit too male in trying to become equal to men or do what men do. Sometimes they lose their femininity. How do I say it? Femininity. Yes. So we've been talking about that, what it means to be female. And it also kind of implies what it means to be male. And if you like to come, even if you're a man, you could learn something. Okay? Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Goodbye to all of you. We'll see you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.